Have you ever seen a quilt that you really liked and attracted your attention and wondered, why don't my quilts look like that? What's different? What's missing? What can I change to get that dynamic look in a quilt that I'm seeing here in front of me? I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I had that same dilemma, and I discovered contrast. Yes, I used contrast, but not nearly enough and not nearly strong enough. Contrast is what sets your quilt apart. It's what makes it stand out bright and bold and beautiful. And I want to show you a quick tip today on using leftover fabrics and some 5-inch squares and putting it all together. Remember that quilt we made not too long ago that had the leftover 1.5-inch strips from the layer cake? We made the 8-point star. Well, I took those strips and I combined them with some low volume fabrics, and I love low volume fabrics. When you mix them up together, they make a beautiful background. And in this particular case, these 5-inch low volume squares work beautifully together, and there's so much going on. There's multiple colors, there's multiple patterns and graphics and florals, and some are batiks and some are prints, and we've got a little bit of everything in there. And when you set those next to these bright, beautiful strips of color, we get an exquisite result. So let me show you how this goes together. The best part, there's not even any matching seams in this quilt. You're going to love it, so don't miss this. And please give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this quilt pattern and enjoy watching the video. Thank you so much. Let's get started. Every quilt has a starting point, and this is where I started for this one. I've got lots of low volume fabrics. I have some 1/4 yards, 1/2 yards, some full yards, and I cut strips off of everything, and I made a bunch of 5-inch squares, and I added them to what I already have. I like when I'm cutting for a quilt, particularly if I'm cutting 5-inch squares, I always cut extra. I'll do an entire strip, if not 2 strips, just so I have them on hand. 5-inch squares are really handy because they make a good size 1/2 square triangle. You can make a 4 patch out of them very easily. And depending on what the quilt is, I tend to use a lot. It's a size that I find convenient, so I like to have a lot of them on hand. With this group, I cut strips. Most of these were full width of fabric pieces, and I cut the full width, which gave me 8 5-inch squares per strip. So that was a lot to choose from, which is great. So I've got a lot to work with. But notice how what I have mixed in here. I have just, some regular prints, low volume prints. I have batiks. I really like the batik low volumes because you don't have to worry about which side is front or back. A lot of times on these pale, faint, light colored fabrics, I have to look at the front and back to figure out which side I'm sewing. With a batik, you can pick it up and go, and you're fine. And you can do a quilt with low volume just in these neutral tones. They're white, they're beige, they're little cream colors. Sometimes you get some grays. This is actually almost a bit of a green gray, which is pretty. But then in order to add more interest, I like to find some low volumes that also bring in some color. And if I have a particular color scheme I'm going with, obviously that'll direct where I'm going. But in this case, I just wanted a little of everything. And these are some batiks that I had bought that I really liked that focused on the blues. And I think that's going to work out really well. And then these are with the white background. And I thought, the print itself is subdued enough. It's going to bring in a bit of color, but yet it's not dominant. At first, I wasn't sure about this, but these white daisies are bright and bold enough that they almost become the dominant color. And so you've got a little bit of gray background with some yellow and turquoise, and we have the yellow here and that sort of turquoise blue. So it all ties together really nicely. What I do want to show you is when you get a fat quarter and you're cutting it, especially if you're going to cut into 5-inch squares, you want to cut it, hit the camera. You want to cut it so you're going to get the most width. or the most usage out of that piece. Now, I have a video on how to cut fat quarters for quilting, how to cut your own pre-cut. I'll put that link up above, and you can see that if that's something you're not familiar with. And below in the description, there are some free templates you can download. And these are templates that I created for me, because these are the sizes that I most frequently use. And that's the 5-inch square, the 10-inch square, and the 2.5-inch strip. And it's a little of everything, but depending on what I'm quilting, I like to have those different options. So that's what we've got. But at the end of your strip, as you're cutting your 5-inch squares, no matter which way you're going, there's going to be a little bit of fabric left over. And we're going to save that fabric for this particular project. And I'm going to show you why. So if you're cutting your own 5-inch squares, then save your pieces. If not, then what we may be doing is using your 5-inch square a little differently than what you may be accustomed to. Now, here's the low volume quilt that I really, really like. And I haven't bound it yet. But what I did is low volume. See, there's some yellow in here. There's some multicolors. There's some pinks. But I also brought in some batiks. And it's sort of a random improv kind of placement. This is a 36-inch block. So each of these have 36-inch squares. And within that, I placed all these, different batiks in a multitude of layouts. And these colors I really liked, how the teal and the gold and that purpley pink little peach. Every once in a while, there's a little group of colors that I get excited about, simply because it's different than something that I've used. Oh, did I hit the camera again? Sorry. Uh, and then I've got, my turquoise, and I have to have turquoise in here twice. But, when you're putting your low volume together, just think about what you like, how you can change it up, what you can add to it. And the quilt that I'm going to show you today is exactly that. So I used all these low volume fabrics and have created an idea. And what I did initially was just take all my low volume fabrics and lay them out. And there's probably about 30 different prints in the low volume. And as I'm laying these out, I thought, I'd really like to spice this up a little, like in this other quilt that I just showed you, which, by the way, I'll include the link for that, because there's also a free pattern for that particular quilt, the 36 patch. And I like adding a bit of bright color in with low volume. I think it adds interest. It's a perfect background for some really bright, bold colors. And it's an opportunity for me to use those 1.5-inch squares from that last quilt that we did. There was a quilt I did with a layer cake, and it was the 8-point star, and we needed to have an 8.5-inch center. So I cut 1.5 inches off of all those 10-inch blocks, and I thought, what am I going to do with it? Well, I have a plan, and I'm really excited. So I'm going to start putting this together. If it's something that you're interested in, this is going to be a 2 charm pack. But chances of finding charm packs in a low volume fabric, I have found is pretty slim. You can get some fat quarter collections, you can get half yards, whatever, but I haven't found a charm pack in low volume. So I buy yardage, I buy fat quarters, I buy whatever I need, and I like to have an abundance of them, or I should say I like to have a variety of them so I can mix it up. And that's where we're heading here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you how I'm going to put this together. Oh, and as I was saying, this is going to be equivalent to 2 charm packs. I've got, I think it's 80. I'm going to do an 8x10 with the 5-inch squares. So 8 blocks across, 10 down, plus some 1.5-inch strips. Plus, remember, I told you, save these little pieces on the end. If not, we can use our charm squares. We'll just need a few more than 80, maybe 90 of them. And I'll show you what we're going to do, because there aren't going to be any matching seams. That is the best part about this. By offsetting with this and offsetting with this, we're not going to have any seams to worry about. So life is good. Quilting will be quick, and I'm excited to get this done. Just for fun, I had to show you this real quick before I start sewing. I put these all together, and I've got them sort of laid out that they're not repetitive. They're sort of equally balanced throughout and not repeating fabrics too close together. And so I started putting them together and going, how am I going to lift this? Well, I slid my ruler underneath here. And look at that. I can just pick everything up. Yay! So that's going to make life a whole lot easier. And I'm just going to start sewing from here and just work from one end to the other. And it's going to be 8 rows of 10 blocks. So let's get started. I was going to press this first, but I just saw some big trucks pull in at the neighbor's house, and apparently they're getting a tree cut down. So we're going to have some chainsaws to compete against. So I wanted to get this recorded before they start cutting. But I wanted to show you each of my rows has 8 5-inch blocks. And then I randomly mixed in some of these 1.5-inch strips along the way. Now, depending on how many strips I use, I think I have 3 to 4 in each row, will determine just what size or what length that row will end up. Now, see, here's one that has 4. But see, I just chain stitched everything. Oh, look, here's one that got lost. Does that ever happen to you? You go along and all of a sudden you realize you missed one somewhere. Not quite sure how that happened, but I'll have to check that out. We'll go back and I'll add a couple blocks to that poor guy. So when this is all coming together, you're going to have your first row and then your second row. And you'll notice as these strips begin being placed, these seams are offset, which means we are not going to have to match seams. But in the beginning, on this first block, I'm just going to cut these apart so we can easily use them. If I continue, there we go, and use this layout, you'll see that these first blocks are going to line up. Now, if you're okay lining up the seams, that's great. But what's kind of fun is to add an extra strip right there. For example, I have a couple pieces here. Here, this is one of the blue ones. And so if I can add this and sew that right there, now see how all these seams are going to be offset and I don't have to match anything. I can just, boom, sew through them. Now, in the end, I'm going to have to do a little trimming because some rows will be a little longer than another. And that's okay. That's a lot easier and it's going to be a lot quicker than matching seams. So this is where you decide how you like to put your blocks together. And one other thing I wanted to show you that I didn't mention first time around, sometimes when you have a block, and this in particular is particularly dark, and if you think that might stand out too much, I'm good with this going either way, but you can actually take a block like this and turn it over, and it becomes much more muted. So here the color is more saturated, and it's brighter, bolder, darker, and you may not want that. So try the back side of the fabric too, because that can work out really well. Because some of these prints are dark enough on the front, they come through on the back, and not quite as boldly, and you can just use this as a softer fabric than that darker contrast. So just keep things like that in mind as you're going along. So what I'm going to do is press rows in opposite directions. All these seams will go this way, all these seams will go that way, and that's only going to make it sew together much more quickly. And what I'll probably do is sew them together in pairs and then put the whole thing together from there. Thankfully, we beat the chainsaws, so let me go ahead and get this finished up. I'll get these pieced together, and then we're going to have a quilt finished before you know it, and hopefully we won't have the chainsaws to contend with. Well, that was quick. I have everything pieced together. There's 8 charms by 10, so each 5-inch square. I have 8 across, 10 the length of the quilt. And I just want to show you how I lined this up. I chose one edge and I made sure that any short ends lined up in the same place. So if you look over here, you can see these are pretty sporadic all over the place. This is where I ended my sewing seam. But what I did here is, you notice these are all pretty much straight in line. So as I would sew one in, I would place this up along this and sew it that way. And then I would put these together here and sew it that way. There may still be some trimming, but at least I have one side that's relatively straight. And so all the way through, as I come down this way, I'm going to have a straight line. So what I'm going to do now is cut that edge. And we'll just lay this out nice and neat. Get it flat. And I want to put this seam right on my grid because I'm relying on my grid and ruler together here. So I'm going to put my seam allowance right on the grid. And let's see, if I do this, that lines up on the line there. This lines up. Yeah, that all lines up pretty darn well. And I'll come right here, lining up along those straight ends, and I'm just going to cut this off. And now I have a straight edge to work with, and I'll do this here as well. So lining these all up, and I really don't even need my grid at this point because this measures evenly on the top and bottom, so I know I'm in a pretty good place. And I'll just trim that piece off up there. Okay, so now that I know where I am here, I'm going to flip this over and do the same in the other direction. And you can find whichever is your shortest strip, and that's where you're going to work from. And for me, whoops, it's on the other side. The shortest strip is right, well, it's a toss-up. It's probably this one. So what I'll do again is I'm going to line this up along the bottom. I'm going to go all the way down here. So I want to be here at this edge and line that up at 33 there and 33 here. And look at that. These two are going to line up perfectly, so I'm not going to have to put in a little piece anywhere. And now I have a square quilt. Look at this. I love it. How adorable is this? I love how these bright colors just sort of pop out as you go. And it is random. And in some places where they touch, that's fine. And I think there's even a spot, yeah, right here where they actually lined up. And that's okay. These are off center, but for the most part, they're spread out all over. And they work really well across the quilt. Add some interesting color to the low volume fabrics. And that's it. It's a very, very simple pattern. So between adding your strips to offset your blocks, as well as putting a narrower block at the beginning, and you can just, take a couple charm squares and cut them in half, or even just cut a 2.5-inch strip and put it there, whatever you like. If you want, you can use some of these to put around your edge to create a border. I didn't quite have enough of that, of those to do that, but I'm just really liking all these bright colors. So that's it. That's all there is to it. And it's a fun and easy quilt. It goes quickly. I don't think I even used an entire bobbin to put this together. And one thing that I did say that I'm going to retract at this point is, remember when I said sewing seam one way and then the other seam the other way? You can press everything the same direction because nothing matches. I'm just so used to doing it that way, it's my automatic go-to. And I'm sewing along going, wait a minute, why am I doing this? And if you sew everything in one direction, then you don't ever have to worry about the seams underneath flipping and going the wrong way. So here we are. We've got some bright, beautiful colors mixed in with some really sweet, low volume fabrics. I love it. We did good. And we beat the chainsaws. Yay! I hope you enjoyed this quilt, and I hope you're able to make one because this is a very easy quilt and it can be done quickly. All right, here we go. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. Give me a thumbs up if you like the quilt, and I'll see you next time. I sure appreciate you being here. Thank you.